"Excuse me, Miss Becker," Judge Harrison Vance said, his voice sharp. He lowered his reading glasses, letting them slide to the tip of his nose as he glared over the bench. "Is this some kind of joke to you? Because in my courtroom we take lying under oath very seriously." He held up a paper, shaking it slightly to make his point. The document was a printed military service record, part of a sworn statement about a speeding ticket. Carly Becker had claimed an emergency was why she was speeding. But the judge wasn't focused on the ticket anymore. He was staring at her life story and a photo of a shadow box filled with medals, both given as proof of her character. Standing at the defense table, Carly Becker didn't even blink. She stood with her feet apart, her hands lightly clasped in front. She wore a bright blue shirt that made her eyes sparkle, and her long blonde hair fell in soft waves. To most people, she looked like a teacher or maybe someone who worked in marketing. There was a gentle look about her that made people think little of her, a mistake Judge Vance was now making completely. "It is not a joke, Your Honor," Carly said. Her voice was soft, but it reached every corner of the room, steady and clear. The microphone on the stand picked up her calm breathing. The judge let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like a cough. He threw the paper onto the heavy wooden desk, the sound loud in the quiet room. Leaning back in his leather chair, he put his fingertips together. He glanced at the people watching, then back at Carly, putting on a show for an audience he thought was on his side. "I have been on this bench for 20 years, Miss Becker. I've seen soldiers in this room. I've seen men who fought in wars and walked through deserts. I know what a combat veteran looks like, and I know what someone who won a Silver Star looks like." He paused, letting the silence grow, waiting for her to get nervous. She didn't. She just watched him, her face calm and showing nothing. "And frankly, young lady," Vance went on, his voice full of scorn, "you don't fit the part. You walk in here in that bright blue top, looking like you just left brunch with your friends. And you expect me to believe you were a soldier in dangerous places. You expect me to believe you pulled 3 men from a burning plane while under enemy fire." Carly shifted her weight a tiny bit. The only sign of movement was the soft rustle of her blue shirt. "Those are the facts, Your Honor. The record is checked and real." "Checked by whom?" Vance shot back. "A print shop. Anyone can fake military papers these days. Anyone can buy medals online. It's actually a federal crime, Miss Becker. It's called stolen valor. And frankly, it insults the real heroes who earned those awards when someone like you tries to use them to get out of a ticket." A soft buzz went through the courtroom. People in the wooden seats whispered behind their hands. To them the scene was clear. A strict but fair judge was telling off a young woman who had gone too far. She looked too young, too fragile, too pretty. Their minds couldn't grasp the idea of her being a war hero. In their eyes, war heroes were tough, scarred men with short gray hair, not young women in stylish blue shirts. "I am not trying to use them to get out of anything," Carly said, her tone deepening and becoming firm. "I gave my record to explain why I had to react so quickly and drive fast during the medical emergency I was responding to. My driving was exactly like my training." The judge scoffed. He picked up the file again, flipping a page with a show of boredom. "It says here you were a pilot, an Army aviator." "That is correct. And not just for transport, for attack. You flew Apache helicopters." "Yes, Your Honor." Vance looked her up and down, his face sour. "My niece is about your age. She can barely park a car. You expect me to believe the United States Army gave you a $30 million war machine?" The court reporter paused, her fingers still above the keys, waiting for the answer. The bailiff, a large man named Miller, who had been standing by the door, shifted uneasily. He had been watching Carly carefully since she entered. Unlike the judge, Miller noticed details. He noticed she didn't fidget. He noticed her eyes constantly scanned the doors and lines of sight in the room, not from fear but from habit. And he noticed the way she stood, the military way of standing at attention that she was trying to hide as a normal civilian pose. "The Army doesn't give anyone anything, Your Honor," Carly said. "You earn it." Vance shook his head, his patience gone. He was tired of the act. He felt he was doing a public service by showing her to be a fake. "Listen, Miss Becker, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm giving you one chance to take back this claim. Say it's your husband's record or your father's, and you got confused. Admit you made it up. We'll pay the speeding fine, and I won't have the bailiff arrest you for filing fake papers." Carly stayed completely still. The air in the room seemed to get heavier, charged with the tension of their standoff. She looked at the judge, truly looked at him, seeing the fear behind his proud manner. "I cannot take back the truth," she said. Vance's face turned red. He slammed his hand down on the bench. "Then you leave me no choice. I am stopping these proceedings to check your background. Bailiff, take these papers. I want the clerk to run a full check with the federal system. And Miss Becker, you'll sit right there until we find out who you're trying to fool." He turned his gaze to the rest of the room. "We are taking a 15-minute break while we sort out this nonsense." As the gavel hit the wood, the room filled with quiet chatter. The judge rushed out of the room toward his office, his black robe flapping. Carly didn't sit down right away. She let out a long, controlled breath through her nose and adjusted the cuffs of her bright blue shirt. Bailiff Miller walked over to the table to gather the papers. He moved slowly, his eyes fixed on the photo of the shadow box that lay face up. He reached for it, his thumb brushing against the picture of a certain medal, a silver star with a gold oak leaf cluster. But it wasn't just the medal that caught his attention. It was the small, blurry photo tucked into the corner of the document, a picture of a flight crew standing in front of a dusty helicopter. Miller squinted. He had served in the Gulf War years ago in a supply unit. He knew enough to know what he didn't know, but he also knew what truly skilled professionals looked like. He looked at the date on the ticket. It was from a valley battle that had been in the news a few years back, a massive rescue under fire. He looked up at Carly. She met his. There was no begging in her eyes, only strong determination. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice low so the onlookers wouldn't hear. "The unit on this record, the 100. Carly nodded once. "Medical evacuation and attack. We were providing heavy support that day." Miller looked back at the photo. He saw a call sign written in the story, Valkyrie. His blood ran cold. He remembered hearing that call sign on the secure radios when he was working as a contractor years later. Valkyrie 6 wasn't just a pilot. She was a legend in aviation circle. The woman who flew a helicopter with no working controls back to base to save her crew. "The judge, he's got a blind spot," Miller whispered, almost apologizing. "He has more than a blind spot," Carly replied quietly. "He sees a world that doesn't include me." Miller nodded. He took the file, but instead of taking it to the back office for a slow check, he walked quickly to the side desk where the court clerk, a young woman named Sarah, was sorting papers. Miller leaned in, whispering urgently, "Don't just check the computer, Sarah. You need to call the Army office at Fort Hamilton. Now, tell them we have Valkyrie 6 in Judge Vance's court, and he's threatening to arrest her for stolen valor." Sarah's eyes widened. "The pilot, the one from the documentary. Make the call," Miller said. Miller turned back to the courtroom. Carly Becker stood alone at the defense table, a sea of whispers behind her. She looked small against the dark wood of the court furniture, her blue top a splash of color in a gray world. But Miller knew better now. He wasn't looking at a young woman in a he was looking at a skilled warrior politely waiting for the signal to strike. The smell of oil and burning air hit her memory before the sound did. It was a feeling triggered by the judge's mocking tone. Carly didn't close her eyes. She couldn't afford to lose awareness in the courtroom, but her mind placed the helicopter cockpit over the room, the control stick shaking in her right hand, the main warning lights screaming yellow and red, the voice in her ear, full of fear, taking fire. 3 o'clock low, RPG, the feeling of the aircraft lurching, the world spinning, not the polished wood of a courtroom, but the sharp peaks of a mountain range. She remembered the weight of the helmet, the sweat stinging her eye. She remembered the decision, the split-second choice to dive instead of climb, to put the belly of her helicopter between the incoming bullets and the medical rescue plane below her. She could feel the hit, the shudder that ran through the plane like a broken bone, the smell of metal and fear. She had held the hover. She had held it steady while the tracer rounds reached up like fiery fingers trying to pull them down. She hadn't thought about her gender. She hadn't thought about her hair color. She had thought about wind speed and the 4 lives in the back of the other helicopter. The Distinguished Flying Cross wasn't just a medal to her. It was the memory of the crew chief giving her a thumbs up through a window smeared with oil. It was the feeling of landing on skids that were barely attached. The memory faded as the door to the judge's office opened, but the feeling stayed, the cold, sharp truth of combat. She looked at the empty bench, Judge Vance thought he was stripping her of her pride. He didn't realize he was only making her strong. 10 miles away at the Fort Hamilton headquarters, the phone on Captain Davala's desk rang. He picked it up, expecting an update on supplies. Duty officer, Captain Davala. He listened for 10 seconds. His body went from relaxed to stiff. He grabbed a pen, scribbling quickly on a notepad. Say again, Judge Vance. And he's accusing her of what? He listened for another 5 seconds, his jaw tightening. You're sure it's Becker? Carly Becker? Davala didn't wait for the answer. He dropped the phone, leaving the line open, and ran out of his office. He sprinted down the hallway past the pictures of past leaders, past the shiny floors, sliding to a stop in front of a heavy double door guarded by a military police officer. I need to see the general now. The MP started to protest. Sir, the general is in a meeting about plans. It's about Valkyrie. She's being held by a civilian judge who thinks she's a fake. The MP's face grew serious. He opened the door right away. Inside the meeting room, General Alicia Thorne was pointing at a digital map of the Pacific. She had a powerful presence, a black woman of impressive height. Her army green uniform was perfect. 4 silver stars shone on each shoulder. The classic uniform looked timeless on her. She didn't just wear her rank, she was the very spirit of the army. Captain Davala burst in, out of breath. General, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. We have an urgent situation at the county courthouse. General Thorne turned slowly, her face serious. This had better be important, Captain. It's Major Becker, ma'am. The retired major. She's in traffic court. The judge is charging her with disrespect. He's accusing her of stolen valor. He's laughing at her record. The room fell silent. Several colonels and a brigadier general looked at Thorne. They knew the story. They knew that Carly Becker had been Thorne's partner during a key military operation. They knew Thorne was alive today because Becker had put her aircraft in the line of fire. General Thorne's eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He's doing what? He thinks she's lying, ma'am. He's making fun of her Silver Star Award. Thorne didn't say another word. She reached for her cap, the soft service cap with the gold braid, and put it on her head. She looked at her staff. Meeting is over. Get the security team. We are going to court. Back in the courtroom, the 15-minute break had stretched to 20. Judge Vance returned to the bench, looking refreshed and even more confident than before. He adjusted his robes and looked down at Carly, who was still standing at the table. Well, Miss Becker, my clerk tells me the computer system is taking a while to load. Government efficiency, I suppose. But I've been looking at the physical evidence you submitted. He held up the photo of the medals again. I noticed something. You have a combat action badge listed here, and yet in your statement, you claim to be a pilot. Pilots get air medal. The key B is for soldiers who directly fight the enemy on the ground. It seems you got your lies mixed up. You couldn't even get the rules right. He smiled. A cold, hungry grin. That is a technical mistake that shows the whole fraud. You see, when you make up a story, you have to be consistent. Carly took a breath to speak, to explain the rule change about pilots in combat, and the specific ground battle she had been part of after her aircraft was shot down. But Vance cut her off. No, I've heard enough. I am finding you in contempt of court for faking evidence. I am also advising the district attorney to file charges for stolen valor. Bailiff, please take Miss Becker into custody. The crowd gasped. This was it. The punishment was coming. Bailiff Miller paused. He looked at the doors at the back of the room. He was buying time. Bailiff, Vance barked. Did you hear me? Handcuff her. Miller took a step forward, his face full of pain. Miss Becker. He was cut off by a sound that was strange in a civilian courthouse. It was the heavy, steady thud of military boots marching together on marble. Not the light tap of dress shoes, but the solid ground-shaking impact of soldiers moving with perfect timing. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. 2 military police officers in full gear stepped in, looking around the room and moving to the sides. The people watching turned, craning their necks. Then she walked in. General Alicia Thorne moved with an energy that seemed to pull the air out of the room. Her uniform was flawless. The dark green coat stood out against the lighter pants. The 4 stars on her shoulders caught the bright lights. Behind her came a group of staff officers, a colonel, 2 majors, and a sergeant major, whose chest was covered in ribbons. The whispers in the gallery stopped at once. The silence was complete. Judge Vance froze, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the woman in the bright blue top to the woman in the 4-star uniform. General Thorne didn't look at the judge. She walked straight down the middle aisle, her eyes fixed on Carly. She marched past the dividing rail, past the stunned prosecutor, and stopped 3 feet from the defense table. Carly Becker instinctively snapped to attention, her heels coming together, her body straightening into the strict line of a soldier. General Thorne stopped. She raised her right hand in a slow, sharp salute. Carly returned it, her hand moving through the air with a precision no civilian could copy. "Major," General Thorne said, her voice clear like a bell in the quiet room. "General," Carly replied. Thorne held the salute for a second longer than required, a sign of deep personal respect, before lowering her hand. Only then did she turn to face the bench. Judge Vance was gripping his gavel like a lifesaver. "I am General Alicia Thorne, Commander of United States Army Forces Command," the general said, "and I am here to fix a mistake." "A mistake?" Vance stammered, trying to get his authority back. "We are in the middle of a case about this woman's false claim." Thorne stepped up to the bench. She moved with the powerful confidence of someone who led huge military. "There is nothing false about Major Carly Becker." Judge Vance pointed a shaking finger at Carly. "She claims she has a silver star. She claims she flew Apaches. Look at her." Thorne leaned forward, placing her hands on the prosecutor's table, invading the judge's space. "You are looking at her hair, Judge. You are looking at her shirt. You are looking at her age. You are seeing what you want to see." Thorne turned to the people watching, speaking to the room as if she were giving a military briefing. "In 2014, then Captain Becker was the lead pilot of an Apache team in the Korangal Valley. I was the ground commander of a task force that was trapped by 300 enemy fighters. We were taking heavy losses. We were out of ammunition. We were calling for emergency help." The general motioned to Carly. "Captain Becker flew into a narrow valley with no visibility. She drew fire away from my troops. When her partner's helicopter was hit, she didn't run. She moved her aircraft between the enemy and the downed plane. She stayed there for 45 minutes with a broken windshield and a failing control system. She is the reason 22 men and women came home to their families that day. She is the reason I am standing here today." Thorne turned back to Vance, her eyes burning. "She doesn't look like a hero to you because your idea of a hero is small and old-fashioned. You think bravery looks like a movie poster, but bravery looks like a woman in a blue shirt who served her country with more honor in a single afternoon than most people do in a lifetime." Vance was pale. He looked at the document on his desk, the one he had laughed at. The dates matched, the names matched. The truth of his mistake was hitting him like a falling wall. "But the combat action badge," Vance whispered, grabbing at any last hope. Thorne didn't flinch. "She was part of a downed aircraft recovery team in 20. She fought enemy soldiers on the ground to defend a medical site. She is one of the few pilots in history to hold both pilot wings and the badge. If you had bothered to read her awards instead of mocking them, you would know that." The general signaled to her sergeant major, who stepped forward carrying a velvet box. He opened it to show the actual medals, shining, heavy and clearly real. "We brought these from the base museum archives," Thorne said, "where they were being prepared for an exhibit on women in aviation. Major Becker doesn't wear them because she is humble, because she believes the act of serving is its own reward." Thorne looked at Vance with a mix of pity and scorn. "You threatened to arrest her for stolen valor, but the only thing being stolen here today is this officer's dignity by a court that judges people by how they look." The courtroom erupted, not in whispers this time, but in applause. Someone in the back started clapping and it spread quickly. Bailiff Miller was smiling broadly. Even the court reporter was wiping a tear from her eye. Judge Vance sat back, sinking into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He raised his gavel but he didn't bang it. He just set it down gently. "Miss Becker, Major Becker," Vance said, his voice rough. Carly looked at him. She didn't show pride. She didn't smile. She just waited. It appears I have made a serious mistake in judgment." General Thorne crossed her arms. An apology, Judge. For the record. Vance swallowed hard. I apologize, Major Becker. I let my assumptions cloud my good sense as a judge. The court accepts your service record as valid. The traffic ticket is dismissed under the emergency response rule. You are free to go. Thank you, Your Honor, Carly said. Her voice was just as calm as it had been from the start. She turned to General Thorne. The two women looked at each other. There was a silent understanding between them, a shared sense of the burdens they carried, the constant need to prove themselves, and the deep connection of those who serve, which goes beyond any uniform. Dinner? Thorne asked quietly. I'm buying, Carly smiled. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the stone steps. The general's cars were waiting, lights flashing, a sight that had stopped traffic on the main street. Carly stood by the lead SUV with the general. You didn't have to come, Carly said. I had him cornered. I know, Thorne replied, adjusting her cap. But sometimes you need backup from above. Carly laughed, a real sound that broke the day's tension. She looked down at her bright blue tie. I guess I should have worn the uniform. Thorne shook her head. She reached out and touched Carly's shoulder. No, it's better that you didn't. They need to learn, Carly. They need to learn that we are everywhere. We are the teachers, the doctors, the mothers and the women in the bright blue tops. We don't wear the armor on the outside anymore. We keep it on the inside. Thorne climbed into the SUV. The door closed with a heavy thud. As the cars drove away, Carly watched them go. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small worn challenge coin she had carried every day since the Korangal Valley. She rubbed her thumb over the raised wings. She turned and walked down the street, melting into the crowd of everyday people. She looked just like everyone else. Unnoticed, quiet, but as she walked she held her head a little higher, knowing that while the world might see just a woman in a blue shirt, she knew exactly who she was. And now, so did